All right. These here are not our sponsors, unfortunately. We wish. Um, but they all have something in common besides saying that they're vanilla, and that is that not one of them is showing a flower of vanilla planifolia. uh, we even have some begonias over there. That's pretty outstanding. Um, and the rest are mostly a few made up. There's a few cymbidiums and dendrobiums and phalaenopsis and I don't know what else. So there's clearly, clearly there's a crisis on the identity of vanilla, of the Mexican vanilla. And when I say the Mexican vanilla, I mean, you know, the vanilla of commerce, the vanilla that has been used for at least 500 years, but obviously much longer before that. And the confusion goes back actually way, way back. I'm gonna talk a little bit about that today. Um, so what I want to address is what is actually the Mexican vanilla. So this vanilla of commerce is the Mexican vanilla aromatic? So we all assume it is, right? Um, and who is vanilla planifolia? And I did that on purpose. So let's first to answer those questions, we really need to go back in time. And when I say go back in time, we got to go back to pre-Linnaean times and do a bit of, well, what I call fun with taxonomy history comprehension, so fun with THC, um, and go and look at some of the original publications. One of those first references that came out regarding vanilla, and the Rerum Educarum is one of the earliest from 1651, where Francisco Hernandez refers to the black flower, which some have said is a bad translation, but he provides a little description of what he found in Mexico at that time. No, probably wasn't called Mexico, but what what they were using as vanilla for medicinal uh, and cultural purposes. And he provides also an illustration of that plant. Um, and that first that first illustration and that first description is quite important because one of the several of the references that we find later in literature go back to this, and they go back to other very old illustrations and texts like Pluckenet's Almagestum Botanicum of 1696, where again he provides a little description, a little text saying that this is the vanilla of the Mexicans, right? And he refers to Hernandez, and in fact, if you look carefully, this illustration is simply a reinterpretation of Hernandez's illustration. So these two texts probably refer or are illustrating the actual Mexican vanillas, right? Because these two can be traced back to the original source. But another very important and critical reference is Plumier, and Plumier offers another small description. He uses the name vanilla and offers a small description for that and cites three species. He, this is all pre-Linnaean, so he's writing there vanilla flore viride et albo, fructu nigriscente. That's what he considers the first species, and it's the species that he illustrates with two flowers and a fruit. And he cites two other species, and then he says this is the what the Spaniards are calling vanilla, right? He doesn't say anything about medicinal uses or anything else because Plumier is working in Haiti. And, and these three vanillas of Plumier are from the Antilles. Now, interestingly, when we now move into Linnaean time, when Linnaeus first talks about the commercially interesting Mexican vanilla, He first in Materia Medica in 1749, he talks about the medicinal uses. You can spot up there, he's saying, well, it's an aphrodisiac and, well, it can be used for melancholy. And in 1753, he provides the first binomial for this, what he considers a species, right? So he says, Epidendrum vanilla is the aromatic vanilla from the Mexicans, and it is all these things here, all these elements here. So with Franco, we did a very rough job of actually going to look at all those references there and to see what they were. And what we figured out is, well, they actually refer to wildly different things. The first thing from Mexico, right, the one we saw before, the illustration by Hernandez, but also the three things from Plumier and several other things that today we consider widely different species. All right. Now let's go to a step forward, and we'll see the description, the original description of genus vanilla. And this, so before that, remember that at the time of publication of the binomial system, there was only one name published, Epidendrum vanilla, which later was considered a different genus, not an epidendrum. And so Miller formally describes vanilla in 1754. And if you look at Miller's text, you'll notice that it is basically a copy of Plumier's original description, a short description and 3 species. So these are the Haitian species of vanilla, right, from Plumier. But Miller, and here is where confusion starts, because he adds, these are the plants that the Spaniards are calling the vanilla or vinelo, much used by them to scent their chocolate. So he adds to the species described by Plumier this information, merging all the known species at the time of vanilla into a single thing. He did the same as Linnaeus did, in fact, mixing things up. Here's the text from Linnaeus, just so that you compare it. And as you'll see from the description here, it says, has an anomalous flower consisting of 6 leaves, 5 of which are placed in a circular order. 6 leaves don't refer to the leaves, they refer to the sepals and petals, right? Because he's copying the text of Plumier. All right, but luckily, the 3 names of Plumier have an original manuscript kept in Paris. And for 2 of them, we have very good illustrations. So we actually know what Plumier was referring to with his Vanilla Flore Viride Albo and his Vanilla Flore Albo ex Viridi. We know that these are those 2 species, and they have nothing to do with what we call vanilla planifolia or the commercial vanilla today. So in fact, we know for a fact that Plumier was thinking of something totally different, but Linnaeus and Miller copied his materials. And so this whole thing got all entangled up. And when Miller in 1768 published vanilla again, now adding a species name, so the type species of the genus, he published, somehow he got rid of Plumier, which was basically copied the first time. This time he doesn't talk about Plumier at all, so Plumier is lost in this description, but he describes vanilla mexicana, so the Mexican vanilla, and says the first sort, vanilla mexicana, is that which the Spaniards are using and cultivating, right? So again, he's saying, this is the commercially used vanilla. But the only reference he gives is, again, Plumier somehow got lost, but he cites this. The only thing he cites is MONOCOTSvii, page 7. And that is an illustration. And we have that illustration, luckily. So this is what Miller was describing as vanilla mexicana. Now, Catesby doesn't say where his illustration comes from. Doesn't mention Plumier either. Luckily, again, we have the original drawings of Plumier. So if we put that next to this, it's obvious that this drawing is based on that drawing. And that is how the Mexican vanilla ended up being a plant that doesn't grow in Mexico, that is found in the Antilles and a few other countries now. And you may be thinking, where did he get the fruit from? There's no fruit there. Right. Luckily, we found that there's a second illustration by Plumier with a fruit. So there you go. What he saw was Plumier's original manuscript, which never got published. He copied that and illustrated that in his text. And this has been used to describe genus Vanilla. There you go. So this was Plumier's original illustration. Clearly, Catesby is a copy of that. And if you look at the plant today, what we call Vanilla mexicana, the only thing that is inverted is the colors. And that makes sense. Why? Because Catesby never saw the plants. He copied the illustration from Plumier, which was black and white, and read the description, which said Flore viride et albo, so he assumed it was white inside and green on the outside. And it's green and white, but not exactly like he illustrated it. So, okay, back to what we did with Franco. So we went to Linnaeus, right, and looked at what is the aromatic vanilla, the Mexican vanilla that Linnaeus is mentioning here. And we went to each one of these references and figured out if they were a non-aromatic species or an aromatic. And it turns out that half of them are non-aromatic, half of them are aromatic, and some are both. Essentially, they all go back to Plukenet, Hernandez, Plumier, and all these illustrations. And so what we have proposed now is that it was never the intent of Linnaeus to publish a non-aromatic species. It was also not the intent of Miller when he described vanilla. So our proposal is to get rid of Vanilla mexicana's type of genus vanilla and select the aromatic Vanilla planifolia. Because otherwise, we are not only not selecting a species that doesn't grow in Mexico, but we are also selecting a species that is of a different subgenus and has non-aromatic fruits. So that makes no sense. As soon as someone decides to split these genera, these subgenera into different genera, all the commercial vanillas, all the aromatic vanillas are no longer vanilla. And that was never the intent of the authors. They just got confused. All right. Let's talk about planifolia. So who is Vanilla planifolia really? And your talk was perfect just before this because it illustrates what people think is Vanilla planifolia. And it's more or less something like this: commercially grown, broad leaves. The fruits are indehiscent. That's why they have to be collected before. And we have some really nice genetic studies coming out lately. Michel showed us one of these where you see variation, genetic variation, and these are very cool studies that tell us a little bit about the genetic variation that we can find in different populations of Vanilla planifolia. But taxonomy is taxonomy, and it's based on types and protologs, not on the use of names. So let's go look at the original description of Vanilla planifolia. So these are the features that people say are typical of planifolia, right? The Mexican origin, features broad, elliptic, oblong leaves, large greenish flowers, and long dehiscent fruits. None of these features are named here. Not one of them. Vanilla, oval lanced leaves. And then it says here, we are informed that it is native of the West Indies. So there's no mention of fruits being dehiscent anywhere. So it was a leap to actually come to the conclusion that what we normally call Vanilla planifolia is Vanilla planifolia. But let me just go and intercede with, with one little thing that I have been telling some of you about during the coffee breaks, and it's why was this species named Vanilla planifolia? Why did he consider it important to call it the flat-leaf vanilla if all vanillas actually have flat leaves, more or less? The reason is because, and let's just go back here, when Andrews published Vanilla planifolia, he said it has been mistaken for Plumier's first species, Epidendrum vanilla of Linnaeus. So he's the first one to actually realize that these things have been mistaken. And he says, no two plants can be more specifically distinct, and we have seldom seen two species of the genus so different in blossoms. So different in blossoms. Let's go back to the text of Plumier. It has an anomalous flower consisting of 6 leaves. The reason that it was called Vanilla planifolia is because Vanilla mexicana has undulate sepals and petals, not because of the leaves, but because the term leaves was being used as a term for petals and sepals. In fact, in old botany it was used like that, and in Dutch and German you still call them Bloomblatt. So sepals and petals are still, Bloomblatt means flower leaf. All right, let's go back to this. Don't tell anyone I told you that. Okay, so what is Vanilla planifolia? Now, luckily we also have an illustration. This is the type illustration of Vanilla planifolia, based on a collection kept in the UK, that flowered in the UK, of unknown origin, believed to come from the West Indies. Maybe Jamaica, maybe because this person was getting plants from Jamaica. And so we have heard that Vanilla planifolia is very distinct from Sotarenasi. That fits very nice, because this is an illustration of the wild vanillas in Costa Rica, which are all Sotarenasi. And, well, the leaves are, quite similar. If we look at another illustration from that same original plant described as Vanilla planifolia, and this one here we photographed at Lancaster, it's really hard to say that these are not the same thing, right? And the same goes for the illustration originally made by Hernandez. If you look at the Hernandez's leaves and fruits, well, these are what we find in Cahuita, in Costa Rica, in the wild. Now, I'm by no means suggesting any sort of revolution, but what I do mean to say is we don't really know what was growing in Mexico in the 1500s, in the 1600s, in the 1700s, and was used as types for these things. And it is well possible that what we see in the Caribbean of Costa Rica, which also I've seen them in in Panama, on the Caribbean coast, and in Nicaragua, it probably extends all the way up. And those are probably the wild population. They could be the wild populations of what people started to grow as Vanilla planifolia, and now has been selected upon at least 500 years, probably more. So we have to be very careful with this. With this, and in fact, I don't think the story is done, resolved. I think it's actually quite an interesting story to do some real studies on perhaps we can find antique materials. That would be very nice. We have heard the talk of Oscar earlier, of vanilla was being used. Is it possible to get DNA of vanillas being used from the 1500s or even before? Could we do some real analysis of what was being used by the Mexicans at that time? That would be a very cool study to understand how those plants came to be and what was actually selected upon to afterwards have cultivated vanilla. Anyways, that's my talk for today. Hummingbirds pollinating a cymbidium instead of vanilla. Come on. I mean, this is just fun. All right, that's it.
Thank you very much. So now it's time to talk about our crisis. Do we have any questions? It's a safe environment. We can talk about our problems. May I start with my exercise of the day?
Thanks, Adam. That was wonderful. It's more a comment. Uh, there are various problems regarding Hernandez illustrations and descriptions. First of all, the Rerum Medicarum isn't the original description. The original description was actually saved for many, many years, and the original drawing was actually burned decades before when the Escorial Library in Spain suffered from this huge fire. So actually, the drawing that we see in the Rerum Medicarum was was a substitute of the original, actually drawn by Mexican people. So there are only 3 orchids drawn in this work, and these are all reinterpretations. It's very sad because this fire at El Escorial Library caused that we don't know what were the original style of the drawings by natives in Mexico, but also we lack all the original knowledge. But the first and original description that is written by Hernandez was published actually in 1790 as the Madrid edition of Hernandez. So it will be very insightful if a very experienced person in vanilla like you could review all the 3 different descriptions that are published in new editions of Hernandez, that are the original by Jimenez from 1615, that one, Rerum Medicarum, and the other one in 1790. So there are at least other 2 references that will be very valuable to be consulted. Other than that, all what you have explained is wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to hear more of your conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Actually, that's wonderful information. It's really worth looking at those historical books once again and papers once again. Um, yeah, it is of course possible that the illustration doesn't reflect what he originally saw, but it's very suspect that it looks so much like Plukenet Salmagestum botanicum. So Plukenet must have taken it from there for sure. So at least in 1696, this is where he would have gotten the inspiration from. At the end, it is not critical in a sense because the type of the species is the other illustration and not Hernandez's, but it's still worth looking into for sure. Thank you for that comment. I'll get that information later from you.
Wonderful presentation, Adam. And it's more question in history, not botany. What Spanish people call Mexico in that time? Because it's expecting to be in Mexico, but not today's Mexico, but which Mexico? Someone knows?
Maybe one of the Mexicans.
Any Mexican to answer? Eric?
Well, first of all, it was not Mexico, it was Nueva España, New Spain. And it started, I think, in Costa Rica or in Nicaragua. That was the Capitanía de Guatemala, which included Chiapas, and it went all the way up to Oregon in the United States. So, but I don't know when it started to be called Mexico or by whom.
I also didn't really want to get into that issue per se because
because Mexica.
It is, but it, you know, it.
Mexica is the inhabitants of the city of Tenochtitlan. It's only the city, and they had a big empire. But that was, they didn't call it Mexico, and it's a good question. I don't know if, I think Gerardo has a good idea here.
Thank you. Remember that apparently the first knowledge that the Spaniards had about the vanilla was in Mexico City, in Tenochtitlan, because it was part of the tribute sent to the Mexica emperor. So Mexico probably has to do with the center of the empire. So perhaps we could talk about this with a beer.
Franco had,
First I saw
yeah.
Franco,
and maybe bring it back
and
to
then
orchids.
maybe after hours, you know.
Monocots.
Thank you. I was just to say that in none of these texts they call about Nova Hispania, because they refer to the people that used vanilla, and they call these people Mexican. So in all these texts, there is no reference to the Spanish name of Nova Hispania. So they refer to the population. And just to distinguish the population, local population, from the Spaniard, they call them Mexican. So in all the texts, they are referring to the plant the Mexican using to flavor chocolate and so on. So there is a difference between the geographic concept and the ethnic concept. So this was the vanilla of the Mexicans, of the people from Mexico.
And I'm very sorry, I need to close my eyes. I don't see more questions this time because we are out of time. But I think Adam will be more than happy to continue
Sure.
tomorrow over the drink during the gala dinner, for example, or coffee break earlier.
Thanks.